Thank you very much for coming back, and hope the coffee tasted great. We're now moving to a short Q&A led by John Sawyer of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. I'm not sure if John will get quite a chance to explain the interesting work his center is doing, but there is something quite clever about how he's leveraging a small amount of reporting resources and really engaging in discussions around foreign coverage domestically. So he will lead the Q&A, and we're very pleased to welcome here this afternoon Dana Perino, who's a governor at the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and also Jeffrey Trimble, the Executive Director of BBG. So could you please join me in welcoming our next panel?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here with Dana Perino and Jeff Trimble. We only have 20 minutes for this segment, but Jeff and Dana are both part of the Board of Broadcasting Governors, and at the middle of this discussion, the debate that's going on about public funding, the role of the government, public funds, and international broadcast, and the issues that we've been talking about today. I know that the board that came in with the Obama administration is embarked on what is billed as the most important strategic review in the 7 decades or so since the International Broadcasting Service was created. So if we could maybe just begin with your thoughts and just give us a sense of where we are in that process and what we can look for in the months ahead.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. I wish that I'm certainly just one of 8 governors, and happy to be serving. We went through a lengthy confirmation process, which finally got finished. I'd like to recognize Paul Foldy, who's here from Senator Lugar's office, who was integral to making that happen, and who also just pours his heart and soul into this issue. We are underway with a strategic review where everything's on the table and nothing's on the table at the same time, meaning that we're just beginning. This is underway. It's actually, we have a quite rigorous schedule and a fast schedule to look at it, but we're going to have some public comment periods, which I'm sure that people in this room would participate in that, and I hope that you will, about everything from structure to funding to the new technologies that are available to us, how we stay a step ahead of them, how we utilize them, the threats and opportunities that come with them. And we've got some ideas. We're not going to wait to implement some of our ideas until the strategic review is finished. But I'm very pleased that we have that underway, although I will tell you it's almost been overwhelming since July when we came on board. We've had 4 board meetings. We're going to have our 4th, 5th in December. Next week, we meet every month. And there's a lot of interest, but the other thing that's interesting to me is that while there's a lot of interest and it's concentrated, so when you go up to Capitol Hill to try to talk about these issues, the legislative assistant or director that's in charge of the issue is very interested. Everyone cares a little bit. Some people have never heard about it at all. They think that Voice of America is an entity that we don't really use anymore. They don't understand. And so part of the other thing that we're doing while the strategic review is underway is trying to peel back the curtain a little bit on what the organization is, what it's accomplishing. And I have to say that one of the things that I've been most impressed with is the professionalism of the journalists that we employ, both here in America but certainly around the world. The danger that they put themselves in. When I worked for President Bush, I was his press secretary, and I got the opportunity to travel with him to many other countries, and often we'd go to places that were emerging democracies. And I remember being in I won't name the countries to protect them, but we were there, and one of the things that he said to the group assembled is that they were talking about how they needed more military help, and he said, "Your military is really important, but a strong free press is even more important for you." We always made time to meet with the journalists. And Voice of America, they actually have one of their journalists in the briefing room at the White House. And we would periodically do interviews with her. It's another thing that the board is working on is trying to get higher-level government officials to do interviews with the VOA journalists and the other entities' journalists. But I will just say that professionalism and willingness to work very hard, sometimes under terrible conditions or dangerous conditions, has really been something that I would like to highlight and celebrate.
Jeff, you're the executive director on the board, and you're before that you were the acting president of Radio Free Europe, and many years working there. I think you're maybe well placed to help us see this in context, this debate that Dana's describing, the discussion that's just beginning. You know, I look at it, my perspective, the Pulitzer Center is a nonprofit journalism center. We are trying to fill the gaps in coverage of international issues at a time when, as we've heard in the previous panels, the commercial model has pretty much collapsed before our eyes in the last 5 years. We're all scrambling for dollars. We're trying to find ways to make this work. And as I look at that, I see a kind of disconnect when I think about the $750 or $800 million that's going to international broadcasting to fill to look at precisely the kinds of issues that I'm out there and others, organizations like the Pulitzer Center, out there trying to cover, and yet it's doing it on the basis of an enterprise that was really crafted for a Cold War reality that doesn't exist any longer and has virtually no presence in the domestic news media environment. I know there are lots of reasons for that historically, and maybe you can help us kind of describe what they are. But there is a problem because we're all talking about, well, where are the resources for this? And yet here is this entity that has, by my standards and by the standards really of whether it's NPR or the New York Times, even by the standards of commercial American news organizations, are huge resources.
$750 million a year ballpark to reach audiences in 59 languages and deliver a weekly audience. There are a lot of ways to measure impact. There are a lot of ways to determine are we doing our jobs well or not. But let me just stick with the very simplest one, which is, are we reaching people? $750 million a year to reach a consistent weekly audience of between 165 and 170 million people around the world is impact. And it's good return on the investment. The governors have looked at this very closely to understand where the money goes, what we get in return for it. That's an integral part of the strategic review. Where are we doing enough? Where could we do more? Maybe could we do less? Could we explore new and smarter ways to deliver our products and seek audiences? You know, I must say, John, after hearing the panels up to this point, my impression is if you're not doing a strategic review in an environment like the one we've heard described today, then there's something wrong with you and your organization. So I think this board comes along at a very fortuitous moment in the history of U.S. international broadcasting with fresh perspectives, wide range of experience and ideas to bring to bear as they look at how to do our jobs better.
No, I would agree with that. The board that came together, it really is very collegial and nonpartisan in our discussions, I would have to say. I mean, everybody comes to the table with an opinion and experiences, but we have just enjoyed very much getting to know each other and working together. And there is some creativity that we are looking into as well in terms of how to maximize dollars. I mean, $750 million is interesting. Can sound like a lot of money, but when you then have to do a 5% cut across the board, you realize that everybody is working on very tight budgets, and so we're mindful of that. But I thought I would just tell you a little bit about something that we're trying to do, which is to make sure that we are not behind the curve when it comes to how people are getting information. I am very mindful, and this is a personal opinion, and everything I'm expressing here today is my personal opinion unless I say it's something that the board has endorsed. I think the new technology is fantastic. And the cell phone use across the world, mobile device use across the world is exploding. And that's a good thing that we can take advantage of. Not everybody has that. 1 billion people in the world don't even have electricity. So I'm mindful that while we try to move forward and capture that, there's like a dual track that we have to do. Because to me, shortwave is still an important way to reach a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't get information at all anyway, and they're hungry for that information. But at the same time, just the other day, we saw that on 60 Minutes when they talked about Facebook, 500 million people around the world are on Facebook, and there are other ways to reach them. And so we're looking into ways to engage people and to get them as part of the conversation, as it's called in the media, using our journalists, our professional journalists' content, but also finding out more about what they want to do. So one of the things we're looking at, I'm just going to hold this up. It's not complete yet, but it was an idea that we had. I don't know, you probably can't see it very well, but it would be a social media site to draw attention to a particular issue. So, for example, rape in the Congo is something that all of us are concerned about. In particular, Susan McHugh, who is also on the board with me, and we actually serve on another board together called Mother's Day Every Day. We're particularly worried about it. She has traveled to Congo. And what we believe is that, especially if you're reaching more women, you can get information to them and they can talk amongst themselves and help each other. It could be an experiment that turns out to be a lowish cost option to reaching a lot more people with very important information. It could turn out that it doesn't work perfectly, in which case then we'll have to find another way. But we are trying to be innovative and think about ways that we can utilize that money that we have more effectively.
So, given an initiative like that is a good example. And the question I have is, what is the market test for success when you're dealing with public funds? How do you determine internally what works, what doesn't work, what should be continued? I mean, the RFE is a good example, a very hallowed history of what Radio Free Europe has done. But today, post end of Cold War, as I understand it, it's like 17 million viewers and $95 or $100 million a year. That's a lot of money for not that much audience. And if you look at the radio and TV Marti, that I think it's Intermedia, the survey company that tracks the listeners, virtually no audience for the broadcast Marti operation, and yet that's something. Let's see, I had that number. I think it's $29 million a year. So, are there sunset clauses? Are there ways that the board has to look at these issues in terms of where do we put resources, and does it make sense to have each of them have their own bureaucracies, their own headquarters, that what look to the outside are like perhaps redundancies in accounting, administrative, overhead, and so on?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that and then let Jeff finish up. As I said, for the strategic review that we expect to take about a year, everything is on the table to be considered. But it's, in one way, you can look at all of the research and you can say, oh, well, nobody's listening. But it's hard to get information out of closed societies. You can't call them up and go door to door and do a survey like you can in America where you do a census. And so sometimes it's anecdotal evidence. Sometimes when you have a political refugee who gets to the country and you interview them, well, of course they were listening. But and so you get information about what their neighbors might have been doing, but you just don't know for sure. And so I also think that, especially when it comes to the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, there are some people, there's a school of thought that thinks that the headquarters should maybe be in Washington, D.C. The board hasn't taken that up yet. I would be personally very skeptical of that, and bringing things to Washington right now probably wouldn't be the most popular thing to do. When everybody is so against Washington, I'm not against Washington, having been here. But I think that looking at the research, which we have, the research contract is now up for renewal, and the amount of information that we have is stunning. And if you supplement that with others, 17 million people listening to Radio Free Europe or watching anything. You think about our networks here in America. CBS Evening News, I think, now gets 5 to 6 million people a night, and it's still one of the best ways to reach the most people in that time slot. But people are getting their information in other ways. So that's why I just go back to thinking about, can we supplement that in a smart way that's efficient, in a way that also reaches people in another way that they're already getting information or learning how to get new information. But also at the same time, not forgetting that there are people in the world who don't have access to look at Facebook. Would you add anything?
Yeah, the International Broadcasting Act requires this board to review on an annual basis each of the broadcast languages and services in which it operates and make determinations about do more, do less, add something, stop something entirely. And this board is therefore required to make some very difficult decisions, and that's included ending broadcasts in some languages where perhaps they'd like to have stayed and continued, but they have to make the tough choice to look at new areas with limited resources and move on. So the board is required and is engaged in a rigorous ongoing process annually, and the strategic review that they're doing lays over that required annual process and will give them a richer picture of the environment by the time that they're done with it.
And like I said, there will be a public comment period. I don't know exactly what form that's going to take place in, but be watching for that, because believe me, the 8 of us don't have all the answers. And we are very open to all sorts of information and inputs, and we're getting some from Capitol Hill, but we would like your input too.
I want to open this up for questions, and I think that microphone is going around. I just had one other sort of big philosophical question to throw out that goes back to what Lee Bollinger was talking about. And he's calling for basically an American-style BBC, an America World Service, and putting a lot of public resources into what, as I understand it, is one big entity. And you all represent one version of that in terms of there is some large brand identity with VOA and the other services. I kind of come at it from the Let 1,000 Flowers Bloom school that says that there's something to figuring out a way. I think I'm all for using public resources to sustain this kind of reporting, but personally I'd like to see a way that goes down to sustain and support organizations that have met kind of market test on their own, that are created, and there are a number of them, not just the Pulitzer Center, that are out there experimenting in this space. And I get nervous when I hear people talk about silver bullets and big solutions where we're going to put a lot of money into one area. And I'm not asking... Well, go ahead.
66% of the country.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what the election was about, right? I mean, it was about what kind of government are we going to be, and how are we going to spend the resources that we have, and the ones that we're going to have a lot of belt tightening. And so that particular question about Lee's concept, when I say everything's on the table, I would suppose maybe that somebody would bring that up. Maybe he will in a public comment. It's not been something that I've heard a lot about, actually. But maybe I'm new to the game.
Yeah, in terms of bigger distribution, I don't know if we've explicitly talked about the Smith-Mundt Act because I've been in and out of the room, but U.S. International Broadcasting is prohibited by law from distributing its content inside the United States. That is anachronistic in the day of the Internet. Our products are, of course, available in the United States, and they are consumed by audiences in the United States. Our broadcasters are widely quoted by U.S. domestic media at this time. Radio Free Asia, Voice of America, drove much of the international reporting on events in Tibet leading up to the Olympics, because they were getting fresh, accurate information out on the ground that was being picked up. So that's a matter for Congress to take up, and for the board and the executive branch working with Congress to consider as to whether or not there'd be a desire to make this high-quality news and information that's produced by U.S. International Broadcasting available more widely, including here in the United States.
That is something that, speaking on behalf of the board, I can say that on Smith-Mundt that we're looking very closely at helping to see if we can get a version of Congressman Thornberry's bill or something like that passed, because we think, one, it's the right thing to do, but also it's obsolete at this point. And then the last thing I would mention is on the legislative structure. Again, you have to remember, this is not like, it's not a private organization that where you can go in and say, okay, I'm going to combine the sales and marketing team and I'm going to do X and Y. We are set up by Congress. And it would take an act of Congress, or many, to change any of the structural issues. So we'll go through this strategic exercise, and at the end of the day, we'll have to see if there are champions that support some of our recommendations in Congress. So it's not, there is no silver bullet, especially when you have those kind of restrictions.
Right. Even in legislation aside, you have the issue, the perception issue, and it was fascinating. I think you all were outside perhaps, but Lauren Jenkins in the previous panel, who's a foreign editor of NPR, was saying that we couldn't imagine doing a collaboration with VOA because VOA was propagandistic. Mm-hmm.
Which I totally reject. I mean, I was the White House press secretary for years. The Voice of America reporter in the White House briefing room could not have been more professional, with journalistic integrity, that told both sides of the story. And I think that from what I knew is that there is nobody in the White House press briefing room who didn't have the utmost respect for her. So I really reject that notion. And NPR might be surprised to find out that there are actually people who might think that about them.
Right. Well, on that, questions. We have a few minutes for questions. Microphones are in the middle. Do we have somebody with a mic? I can't see with the lights. Questions?
While the microphone's going around, I'll just add that on the issue of credibility, are we propaganda? That's something to which we're very closely attuned, because the audiences that consume our products around the world, by and large, are audiences that have grown up in restricted media environments. They know propaganda when they're hearing it, and they turn it off. Mm-hmm. We have to work very hard to tell the whole story to gain the trust of audiences. We have 3 basic measures that we use of success. I've already mentioned one: reach. How big are our audiences? There are 2 others. The second is reliability. Do audiences find our products credible? And it's astonishing, in fact, to us sometimes how professional our journalists are, that in environments around the world where anti-American sentiments are extremely high, so there would, you'd think, be a huge bias against our broadcasts, majorities, solid majorities, find our broadcasts to be credible, despite anti-American feelings. Mm-hmm. And the third question we ask is understanding. Reach, reliability, and understanding. We're not in the business of moving the needle. We're not about changing people's minds with targeted messaging. There are other parts of the U.S. government that have that job and do it. We're about informing people, but we do ask them the question, having listened to our broadcasts, having consumed our material, do you have a better understanding of the United States and its policies? Not do you like us more, do you have a better understanding? And again, audiences do. Audiences that consume our products have a better understanding of the United States and its policies.
If I could just add, I'm sorry, I know we need to go to questions, but I do want to point out just a couple of things. I think there's another measurement that we have to start looking at, and that is whether or not we are competitive. Because there are so many different ways for people to get information now. Again, not everybody in the world, but a lot of people in the world, lots of different ways to get information. So what would make them want to come and listen to a Radio Free Europe or a Voice of America or even Middle Eastern Broadcasting Al Hurra Network story over somebody else that might have access to the same type of information, or even to the same senators that are asking those questions? So what will make us competitive? One of the things I was so impressed with the first month that we got there, RFA was given an award. I'm speaking about journalistic integrity and peer review. They got one of the highest awards in journalism for breaking a major environmental crime story in China. Wasn't it China? Mm-hmm. And more than any other news organization in the world, and years ago that might have gone to somebody like a 60 Minutes or NBC News, but no, it was Radio Free Asia that won that award. And the last thing I mentioned, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the other thing we're dealing with in terms of reach, and it's not just us, but all free media and private companies are dealing with internet circumvention problems in places where there's not a free media. And just as we figure out how to get around them, they figure out how to close it off. And then it's this constant vicious cycle. I was very impressed by some of the engineers. It's a small shop. Is it IBB? They work for IBB? A small shop, these 3 people who basically sit there and they figure out all the time how do they push content into places where they're usually blocked from seeing anything from Voice of America or Radio Free Asia, etc. But we need to do more of that. There's some money at the State Department that Congress put there and that we have utilized some of. We'd like to utilize more of, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about internet circumvention. That is actually something that I think perhaps not just our government, but working with BBC and others, that maybe if we pooled our resources to work together more on that, we'd actually be more effective.
We've just about used up our time, but is there a question?
I just have one quick kind of a question and a comment as a really invested stakeholder in what you guys are all doing. Part of what we've dealt with is the fundamental structural problem that when you come as a government-funded media enterprise, regardless of what your content is, it's greeted with suspicion. And so it's not so much about what you're programming, but just how it's supported. And I've just wondered if you've thought about that in the strategic review, if there are other ways to be supporting that content, but distributing it in different ways, or removing the U.S. government brand in the way that it is currently tagged, because I think that in this environment where audiences are in every country are so much more sophisticated and looking for authentic voices in some way, just if the workarounds that you guys find, if there's other ways in terms of the structure you might find,
I'm
would
glad
serve
you
your
asked.
ends. Yeah.
I'm really glad you asked the question. I don't know if the board will think I'm getting ahead of myself, but everybody agreed that we should at least look into it, so I'll bring it up. And it might not be a new idea necessarily, but I think it's a good one, which is how do we maybe repurpose some things that we have here that we could acquire. The Sunday shows here in America have long been a tradition, and I think that there would be a way to work with those executive producers and those networks to ask them if they would be willing to allow us to take that content and then run it in full, no editing, for other audiences, and they can pick it up and again, an experiment to see if people would want to hear it. But what I have found, and I remember this just even as serving as the press secretary, is that to be competitive, you need to get the interviews with the high-level people who are making decisions in America about the future of, well, both domestic and international policy. You're not always going to get John McCain to be able to talk to Voice of America every week, but you might find him on a Sunday show every week. And Secretary Clinton, she goes on the Sunday shows, and it would be wonderful to be able to take that unedited and be able to resend it. And I don't know how, from a cost perspective, I don't know, I'm optimistic that it's not really not that hard anymore to do that from a technology standpoint, and if we can get their buy-in to allow us to do that, I think that that is something that we're going to try to look into. And I would say that with the board that we have, and especially the leadership of Walter Isaacson, that those types of ideas, I think, will get further down the field than maybe they would have before.
And I think, to the extent that you pursue those types of collaborations, repurposing of shows here, you run them in full, you also address the perception issue that we talked about before.
Exactly,
so
exactly.
I mean, maybe one more? Well, Tom, I'm getting the hook from Tom.
We're getting the white cane. I'm sorry, I talked too long.
No, we covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you.